All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. This always sneaks up on us, but hope everyone is doing well. I know it's been a crazy week again. Every week seems to just get crazier, with filled with so many stuff going on around everything. Sorry, my dogs are barking in the back, so I don't know if you can hear them. If you can, yeah. Um, so we're jumping into a new book. We just finished the book of Romans, and it's been honestly, it was a great adventure. It was a great journey. We had great conversations, great dialogue. So we're excited now to jump into the book of James and check out some new territory with James. And so yeah, we're gonna just jump into it with the book of James. Now, a question. I know Brian and I were talking a little bit about it before. Stephen, do you know who James was? I don't want to put you in the spot like that, but I know there's because Brian and I were talking before this, right? We were talking. There's a lot of different options. James could be either. That was really honest. But I was saying
I don't want to put you on the spot and then put you on the spot.
Hey, Steven, can you cite 10 verses from you real quick? Just not to put you on the spot, but let me see what you know, brother.
Right. Oh, man.
Test,
all right, no.
bro.
Well, what I was saying was there's a lot of dialogue, as Brian and I were talking before, of who could, not a lot of dialogue, not as much as like I think who is the author of Romans, but of who was James, right? So Brian and I both believe that it was the brother of Jesus, right? So I don't know. That's what I was trying to get to, right? Who do you think?
I mean, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, the brother of Jesus. That's the idea that I have. But then again, who knows? I don't know.
Who really knows? Yeah.
Who really knows? The earthly brother of Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. The earthly brother of Jesus.
We all thought that's what you would say, Stephen.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I asked it, right? Because I knew that was the whatever. Consensus. But yeah. So this is James. Oh, before that, obviously you can see our background. I did want to highlight. I'm going to write down this is the today is the day where the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, also known as the March on Washington or the Great March on Washington, was held in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday, August 28, 1963. So almost 50 years now? That's crazy, right? 60.
No more.
How much is that? 63? I can't do math. I have to round up.
57, I think. 57 years, I think.
Yeah. And so the purpose of the march was to advocate for the civil and economic rights of African Americans, right? So you can see a picture there in the back, people marching. This is where Martin Luther King and others, I think even John Lewis gave a speech, and different others gave speeches concerning the African American plight regarding civil and economic rights. And it's crazy that 57 years later, we find ourselves in a very similar situation, right? Unfortunately, obviously some things have gotten better, but at the core, as we've been seeing, there's still a lot of, obviously racism and systematic oppression. But I think a lot that what I was trying to find is the word to say is like a lot of people that just don't believe the plight or this fight exists, right? And I think that kind of makes it hard for everything for progress to continue to get for there to be progress, because if there's people that just don't believe it exists, that don't really believe that's a problem, then we just stay in the same place, right? So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts before we jump into that on that topic there, or anything that's been happening this week with the MLS, MLB, NBA, WNBA going on boycotts, or I guess they were also calling it wildcat strikes, and not playing their games. Any thoughts on that you guys might have?
It was interesting to see. Sorry.
No, go ahead, bro.
All right. I was just gonna say that it was interesting to see how, how incidents happen and people aren't willing to talk, but all of a sudden, their entertainment gets cut off and everybody's going up in flames, and just like what we give priority to, do we give priority to human lives, or do we give it to our own satisfaction, entertainment, to spend like 2 or 3 hours on the TV? I thought that was kind of crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's interesting, right? I guess if we want to talk about, the sports reaction is kind of what like has been in the news the last couple of days. I guess you always hear the whole thing about and that kind of feeds into what we're talking about in Romans, right? Like, well, they're rich athletes. Why should they care? They're not oppressed, right? But I think it's this sort of forgotten element that this is their communities that they're talking about, right? If they couldn't, if they weren't good at shooting a basketball or dribbling, or, if they weren't good at these things, they would probably potentially find themselves living in those communities right now, and whenever they're not having their season, that's where they're going to visit. That's where their families are. That's where their friends are. That's where they grew up.
Right.
And I think, people, a lot of times us on the other side, think that, well, they shouldn't care because their lives are good. And so there's this sort of idea that, well, if it doesn't affect you,
right,
and why are you talking about it? Why does it matter to you? You know, and then it's so much easier to kind of dismiss or undercut because it's easier. It's easier than having to consistently address it. I'm going to point out all the little. I'm going to try to poke holes in this thing, but I don't know. It doesn't even. And personally, like, I mean, I'll just say, when after Jacob Blake, after that happened on Sunday, I just kind of felt like numb, in some ways. I just kind of was like, this is another, and I felt bad, a couple, like Tuesday, just thinking like, man, I'm losing that sort of visceral reaction, right? This sort of like, I'm just going to go out and talk about it or speak out about it or try to do something, like I didn't have that reaction initially. And I think like there was just this, but that's the freedom I have to be able to not engage, whereas, African Americans that have grown up here, they don't have that freedom, they don't have that to just, I'm just going to disengage from this, That's
good. Yeah.
They never can, and even me, I can still choose to disengage in some moments, right? I can wish the NBA would still continue playing because I want to see, my team win the championship.
Right.
But, that's still my convenience over their life, right? It's just that difference, and understanding that and their families' lives. Yeah. So yeah, that's just kind of been my headspace, right now.
Yeah. No, I hear you. It's been the same too. You just kind of get numb. Like you said, I'm not even a part of that community that has to face the reality of, fearing for my life every day I go out. But still you feel numb. You look at that, you start questioning again, will things ever change? It just seems like the more you talk about it, this is a perfect time to bring about this change. And it seems like there's nothing ends up happening. And then you have those trolls on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram that's just like, well, what is LeBron sitting out or the NBA? What are they going to accomplish? They have millions of dollars, and obviously they're all doing their own things, their own charity work, their own, LeBron has the I Promise school in Cleveland. And so there's a lot of things that people are doing, but just that attitude, I think it just goes back to the core root that it's kind of blaming the people that are in that situation for their own problems, right? That's like, let them figure it out rather than realizing that, no, this is not something that's it's not their problem. This is our problem because as a nation, we've been founded on the systematic racism that has been causing all these issues and plaguing the Black community like this, right? So a lot of people, it just the years were saying, right, it's an inconvenience to me because I want to get back from home after I want to get work. After work, I want to go home, watch the games. I don't. Why are they pros? Why are there politics in? It's like,
I miss the days when no one, when no one like I just kept seeing that when politics wasn't in sports or it's just I think people don't want to feel uncomfortable with that, or even I mean, there's another element too of just like humanizing these athletes, right? Because I think for a lot of us, we're just like, it's LeBron, he plays basketball and that's all I understand of him, but he's a human being, right? And then also I think too the systemic element of what they're doing. People are saying, what's the point of doing this? But understanding how money works in the context of the league, in the context of America. The interests, the players make millions of dollars, but there's people above them that make more millions of dollars. That own these teams that are, so there's these power dynamics at play as well. 100%. And so, props to them for that.
Making that stand. Yeah. I'm reminded of just this quote and then we'll move on. But I just got fact checked. I thought that Benjamin Franklin wrote it, but I was looking it up right now and they said that they couldn't find it in his writings. So don't know who wrote it, who came up with this, but it says justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. And I think that's what the players and everyone else is asking for. They've been mad, the famous quote, like, to be black and aware, I guess, or woke, I guess we would say now in America, is to live in a state of perpetual rage, right? Because you're just always mad. So what they're asking for is for everyone else that's not affected by this, right, to be as outraged and upset as everyone else, and that's when justice can really come, right? So
yeah, I think it also speaks highly of this thing that they tried to do, right? Just writing messages, which are nice, messages on their jerseys and things like that. But I feel like, man, we're past words at this moment. It's not just like, you put a little sign up and all of a sudden people are gonna change their minds and their hearts towards, others. And I remember, I don't know, I remember listening to and I got this from my soccer news. So, I mean, I watched soccer news and they were talking about the NBA and they put this clip. So I'm putting that out there in case this isn't as accurate as it should be. Like LeBron didn't really want to put a message on his shirt or whatever. He was like, what's the point? They know that I'm with them, basically.
Right.
And he was one of the first people to be all for this the stop of NBA, and when that, props to him, because I think a lot of times we're really quick to write something, to post something, but man, we are so slow to getting something done, man. We're so slow to action. And as the Adventist Church in general, we are dragging our feet constantly, especially to fight in favor of those who aren't baptized or aren't living the life we agree with. And that needs to change, so kudos, LeBron.
Yeah, that's good. It's like the grumpy kid, right, dragging his feet. Do I have, the church is like, do I have to say something? It's like, yes.
Yeah, but I think like Brian's saying, even greater than saying something, it's doing something, because we live in a world where you can make a statement, or you can make a post, right? So I was really even gauging this week, like, does it really matter if I post anything? Because someone could just go to my, they could look at my page or whatever, and then just jump to another page that says what they want to hear, because words are constant. So I think the ability to sit down and have conversations with people, like face to face, like a FaceTime conversation at least, versus an IG or Facebook argument, I think is so much more key, because it adds a human element, which I think is at the core of all this, which is humanizing of Black people in America, and even in cultures, across the world. I mean, shout out to Las Doñas Hablan, talking about colorism and how that affects other demographics of people. So just understanding that, I mean, that was the case in my community. Growing up, it was always like, don't hang out with Black people, or don't look this way. So it's just. It's unfortunate how those kind of things have affected the Black community. So.
That's good. Good thoughts. Sir. I think James speaks, especially this first chapter, speaks into this, right? The idea of not just talking and sharing and saying things, but actually doing, right? James is very active in doing. He gets to the point where people would even, I think, who was it? Martin Luther was like, I wish James wasn't in the Bible, because there seems to be an emphasis on works more than faith, right? Comparing to where Martin Luther says that Romans was his favorite book, all about faith. Here, James is like, yeah, there's faith, but don't forget that you got to do something. So I think this is a very appropriate book for that. And I thank you guys for the dialogue. Obviously, I think we'll dip back into this conversation as we move on here, but we'll just begin with chapter 1. We'll be reading the first verses 1 through 8. And I'll just start here. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. Interesting to say, right? Especially as this is his brother, to say I'm a servant of my bro. But that's cool. To the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings. Then he goes on. He begins his letter. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may mature, as people have been saying it recently, and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. that person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all that they do. Consider it pure joy, brothers and sisters. Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is just, I think in the context, right, he's obviously, we're talking, he says there are 12 tribes scattered among the nations. So it seems like obviously this is people that for various reasons are all throughout the Roman Empire, we would say. I think this is where the diaspora, right, would be mentioned, if I remember my New Testament class correctly, right, where they've all been scattered. And so they're all facing different tribulations, right, whether that be, religious, because they're fighting against the Jews and just what they believe and applying Jesus as a Messiah. They're fighting against the current culture and context, the Roman, of the way of life and how to live, right, as we were talking about in Romans. So he's saying, look, when you face trials and tribulations and of any kind, right, of all types, be joyful about it, because you know that it's testing your faith, it's producing perseverance, and it's helping you become more like God, right? You're becoming more mature, complete, and lacking nothing. So yeah, I think it's very interesting, this idea of that you are going to face tribulations and trials in this world. And so it's a matter of how do you face what you're facing, right? What approach, what attitude do you have when you're going through hard times?
I think it's interesting how it says, count it all joy when you meet trials of various kinds. For the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And I don't know, I'm just obviously thinking about the conversation we just had at the beginning, and this sort of idea of trial or testing of your faith, or even, challenging it, and how I think I'm just, the word that's jumping out to me is various. I don't know how it's translated in yours. I don't know if it's various also.
Where?
Various, in verse 2, when you meet, my ESV says, when you meet trials of various kinds.
Gotcha. Many kinds, yeah.
Many kinds, yeah. So like just this idea that, I think we oftentimes are comfortable with certain trials, like, oh, I can kind of deal with this one, right? This is one that I'm steadfast in this one, so I'm good. I can kind of handle this one. Right. But I think there are things that are, various kinds. There's gonna be different types of challenges that are maybe uncomfortable for you, that are different for you, and those also strengthen your faith. And so I think even when you're looking at this, like we were just saying at the beginning, like, some people are unwilling to really engage. Well, I don't really, because that might put me in a path to have to grow my faith, and growing is in most cases difficult. Is most when you're a kid, and you have like something called growing pains. I don't know if that's real or not medically, right? But the sort of idea, that there is this painfulness, that this stretching of your faith, the stretching of who you are in Christ, and developing that. I think oftentimes we are okay with certain types, but then there's other ones that are a little bit more difficult, that are going to stretch us a little bit more. And the word is still the same, to count it joy, to count it as to look forward to saying, all right, I'm going to grow in this way. I'm going to engage in this way, and it's going to bring about joy, because it's going to help my faith and also the faith of those around me. So.
That's good.
Yeah, I like here where it mentions, for that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. And that's verse 3. And I like it because many times, man, I don't want my endurance to grow. I just want the day I'm asking for to just come, or the blessing to show up. And for so long, I feel we preach this message of like patience, of like, even this whole idea, Jesus is coming soon, but you have to be patient, or something good is coming your way, but you have to be patient. And it's like, when you're listening to that and you're going through situations that, or hardships that just completely suck, right? That is not something that you planned for. It's not something that you wanted. It's just mind puzzling to me that James isn't like, hey, continue in this, your day's gonna come. He's like, continue in this, it'll grow your your perseverance, it'll grow your patience. And I'm like, man, that I don't think that's a promise. I don't think that's something that I want, for it to grow. I want for it to stay the same and for other things to grow. But I really like where he goes with that, because in verse 4 he says, so let it grow, for when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. Right. I think that word perfect in other renditions is something else. I don't know. But when I read that, I don't see it as in like, oh, now I'm perfect. Now I'm gonna be, all right. Now I'm gonna be whole. But I think this perseverance is really this fact of like trusting in God, even though your circumstance is like just total,
messed.
Yeah, it's just very messed up. And then you'll be made perfect. So like, I feel like where he's coming from is like, hey, things aren't going well. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about works soon, but even if your situation isn't the greatest, just stay yoked. Stay yoked to the Master. Stay yoked to my Lord. Because he's the he's the example of his own letter. I think Seba and I were talking before, and Christian tradition, right? The history that we have, which is passed on through like some kind of oral tradition of history. They say that this guy, when he died, which I don't know how true this is, I wasn't there, but he was thrown off the wall of the temple. And when he landed, he was, badly wounded, but he didn't die. And so those that were like persecuting him already and threw him off on the wall, came down and just beat him to death as he was praying for them.
It's wild. Wow.
And so it's like, that seems like a situation I wouldn't want to be in. But yet, that same guy is kind of writing this to the 12 tribes, right? And I love that he mentions. Sorry, I'm going on.
No, you're good. You're good.
Here.
Yeah,
I love that he mentions the 12 tribes, because obviously, like you said, Seba, from class, that there weren't 12 tribes. It had been a long time since there weren't 12 tribes. But he appeals to this sense of like strength, like the strength that they have, and their in their history, the richness that they have in their history.
Yeah,
and I think that's good, because like, just to put it in my terms, when it comes to like football, soccer, and I think of my where I was born, Argentina. I'm always rooting for them in the World Cup. We haven't won a World Cup since '86, 1986, right? But I still hold on to like, oh no, we're World Cup winners. We're champs. Like we are contenders because we won, 20 plus years ago. And I like that he begins that way, because he calls out to them. It's like, hey, you were once the 12 tribes of Israel, and you did experience this amazing God that brought you out of the worst of circumstances. And so you were a slave then, and it never benefited you. Now I choose to be a slave now to this master who has given me everything. And so I feel like he's coming from that, from that backstory, from that backdrop, right. Talking to us about like, hey, let your perseverance grow. Remember, the 12 tribes, they were slaves for 400 years. So let your perseverance grow. I think that's a powerful statement.
Yeah. And like you guys have been saying, I think this is very applicable to today, right? A lot of people that have for hundreds of years, right? 400 years too, with all slavery and Jim Crow and prejudice and discriminatory laws as well. And so people that have been, generationally been, as you were saying, Brian, having to exert perseverance and endurance, right? So the beautiful thing is that, hey, count it joy when you're suffering and going through this, as hard as it is, right? But what I like too is that he's kind of saying, like in verse 4 too, as you're doing this, perseverance and in this endurance, as you keep as you keep going and not giving up, you can become mature, complete, not lacking anything. But then he says, if you are lacking something, though, you can go to God and ask him for it, who's going to give generously to all without finding fault. And then he says, when you ask, you got to believe it, that he can actually give all that. So I like it too, that even in those moments where we're like, I just can't do this, God, I don't think I have it in me to be able to do it. James is saying, hey, look, when you come to the end of yourself, that's when you really find God, and you can ask God to help you in those situations. So yeah, it's a tough time, though. It's a tough pill to swallow, because usually we want to hear, it's going to get better right now. Tomorrow you're going to wake up and it's going to be gone. And James is saying, hey, no, as long as we're here. Paul kind of talked about that too, right? He didn't say, that, you're not separated from God, because you can't be separated from God because, tomorrow it'll be, no, he's like, you're going to face tribulations, no persecution, no nakedness, no sword can separate you from his love. So saying that you are going to face tough times, but in the midst of that, God is still with you, and you are never alone. And so I think that's kind of hard, especially for them that were beginning to be persecuted, either by their religious folk, the Jewish community, or then by the state, by the Romans. They're literally facing life and death situations. And so trying to make sense of that. So.
Yeah, and since you mentioned those verses, I kind of want to point out it at least in the NIV, it seems to be really bashing on people who doubt. And
Right.
just to be completely transparent, I doubt all the time. And maybe yeah, and it's just like, oh, that person who doubts, like
sucks.
Yeah. Don't worry about them. Don't even talk to them. But I think that a better understanding of this lets you know that he's not saying like don't doubt. He's saying don't doubt in the sense of having your loyalty be of God and of the world. In other words, like I'm asking for something. All right. If you're asking God for something, depend on God to give it to you.
Right.
So it's like, oh, God, I'm asking you for this. And then I'm going out and doing my own thing, trying to get it done for myself. That's what he's saying is like this doubt that brings about this person that is never still, is not ever really planted on God.
That's good.
And has like this double-minded that's unstable. And yeah, because you're serving two masters in the end, and so that's the doubt that he's talking about. He's not talking about that like, God, do you exist? Or God, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to come through it. Like, that's okay. Like, it's okay to doubt.
Right.
But what he's meaning here is this doubting of like, when you ask God and rely on God. Don't ask God and go do it yourself. And then
Right.
I think that's what he's talking about here.
Yeah, that's good.
So I'm not gonna lie with the verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God. So that was like my favorite text for a while, like when I was in high school. So it's a quick story. When it was like a sophomore in high school. I had like my GPA was like a 1.3 or something crazy.
Oh my.
That's why you're a pastor.
And low key, man.
Oh man.
But I mean, that was obviously a small element of the other things that were going on at that point in my life. But I just remember like my mentor, like my youth leader was like, yo, you should read James chapter 1. And I was like, all right, cool. Like, I mean, I didn't really care. I mean, I had grown up Adventist, right? I didn't really care about the Bible like that. It kind of like worn off in terms of like, when I was a kid. But I remember reading this portion and I was like, oh shoot, like I'm about to just ask God, because he's gonna give me that wisdom, I mean, imagine like, I mean my parents were not thrilled with that, but I was like, you know what? I'm just giving it to God. So it's just interesting. I always am taken back to that moment in time. And it was something that kind of stuck with me, throughout my life, just kind of remembering like wisdom, sure, like academic wisdom, but I think wisdom obviously goes beyond just that. It's not just knowledge or the ability to recite information, but it's something deeper than that. And and all these different things we're talking about, and then coupling that with verse 6, where it says one who doubts is like the wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. I think like this sort of like when we're living in this doubt, right? Because like, Brian, don't feel sad. I mean, I doubt all the time too. Like, I mean, even just this week, you have so many doubts, so many different things that are.
Bro, I'm
you're
almost
literally
proud of it, man.
it's almost a strength, It's almost
Brian the doubter.
Hey, how are you gonna grow, man, if you're just like taking things for
Right. It's that struggle. Yeah, that change, that struggle. Yeah.
And it's like being tossed, and I think that feeling sucks sometimes of being tossed back and forth, but I think there's still the beauty of that too, though, is that there's still a way of escape, right? There's still a way of journeying through that. And so that's been at least the story, in my own life. And it's an ongoing thing, I think like we kind of wait for that moment where, Christ entered in and all doubt has faded away. And I think like maybe if you read it, you might feel that, like that's what you're supposed to do. And that I think there is like over time as you mature, as Sebi was saying,
mature. Wow. Very good.
But I think it's just this continual growth process in that. So that's for me. It was just a kind of a
that's good. I like
experience with that.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's pray and
that's a good word right there, man.
All right, man.
But no, let's try to at least go. Let's see if we go to the next section here, 9 through 18. James continues in that, right? Awesome. Just laying the groundwork. We can only imagine what's going to come ahead in his. He's starting, with a pack. Paul in Romans started a little more lightly, James is already kind of going, hey, your life is going to be hard, but have joy. And God can provide what you need. So he continues in verse 9, believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position. But the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like wildflower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. Its blossom falls and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away, even while they go about their business. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all he created. So a lot to unpack here. He kind of, what in your version 12, I don't know what Bible versions you guys have. What does it say? Blessed is the one who perseveres under, or what does that say for you guys?
Says, God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Afterward, they will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him.
Okay.
Yeah. Mine says, blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial. When he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him.
I see. Yeah, because it seems to be like, obviously trial here. I don't know what the word is. Obviously, it looks like it's pointing back to the beginning, right, about trials. But also, I know in other versions, it's kind of alluding to temptations, right, that we may face as he goes in to talk about that later, right? Blessed is the one who perseveres.
I think it's awesome that he makes that distinction, He makes that distinction between a trial and a temptation. Okay. And yes, trials may come from God to grow us. But temptations don't come from God. It comes from our heart. It comes from our desires. And so, when you lean into those temptations and you act according to those temptations, you will, reap what you sow. And that's basically what James is saying. Whereas a trial is like, oh, God sent me this trial. Man, it's tough. But just the mere fact of God sending it to you already gives it like this notion of victory, right? It's like if God's the one that's sending it to you, you're gonna get out of it. Like
right.
You are bound to get out of it. And so it's almost like a trial that comes with this coupling of like assurance of success, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's so pivotal for James to say, hey, you know, don't be divided in your loyalties,
Right.
in your what's this word that he uses, doubt, right?
Yeah.
Don't be doubtful, right? And because at the end of the day, when the trial comes and God is there, you know,
Mm-hmm.
hold on to God and boom, you know, you got, I mean, it sounds a lot easier than it is. I'm sure a lot of us are going through some trials and it's very difficult, but that's why he's saying like, hey man, there's reason to be joyful
Right.
through
Right.
trials, because it already has this, you know, coupling of success
Mm-hmm.
along with God. So I like that he makes that distinction.
That's good. That's good. I like that too. Yeah, it's interesting too. Also, how I mean, beautifully. Before I get to the other part, he just echoes. It kind of seems like he's mentioning, at least what it came to mind in Matthew 5 when Jesus is talking on the Sermon on the Mount, and he says at the end of it, right? Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, right? And then he says, you know, blessed are you when they do all this, because just like the prophets of old, you know, great is your reward in heaven. So in the same way, it's kind of that idea of, you know, just hold on, you know, even I think even to the beginning, right? You can have joy because of what's coming after, right? You can face what's going on today because you know what's prepared for you, right? The crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. So that kind of keeps you going, not just in trials, but in temptations too, to really focus not just here in the here and now, but also in what's to come, to try to give you that motivation to keep going. And then he, you know, just how he also personifies temptation, right? In verse 14, you know, temptation, when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed, then desire, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, right? It's very like imagery right there. So you have this temptation, it's your own desires, you're enticing yourself, your thoughts, your thinking, and that then leads and gives birth to sin, which then when sin is full grown, it says it gives birth to death, right? So it's just kind of these, how your decisions and your thoughts and your actions lead eventually to death, right? It's your destination, your final destination, your result. So it's interesting how James really personifies that.
Yeah.
And it's not just like it's more image. Yeah, it's like more of an image that you can see. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, you know, just the way that, you know, it kind of describes temptation as being, you know, our own desires, right? There is this sort of like certain things challenge us or tempt us more than somebody else. And I think it's kind of this sort of inner, like, man, what are my, you know, earthly, or, you know, we kind of use this term, earthly or fleshly desires, right?
Right.
To what God, you know, desires for us. And yeah, and just kind of the very, I think I appreciate James, because James is, in terms of communication, like, he's just very straightforward. He's like, you have this desire, it's going to lead here. And it's going to lead to sin. And when sin,
it really is straightforward.
It's going to lead to death. Like, it's just very straightforward. Like, if there are any questions, like, all right, let me just lay this out for you. So, you know, you're not beating around the bush, you know, and I think a lot of times maybe it's easier to kind of go that route. And then also just, you know, because before that, you know, because I think when he's saying, blessed is the man who is steadfast, God is, you know, God is they'll receive the crown of life. I think too, you know, I think there's this sort of continual endurance, right? That is needed, or I guess that it mentions, because it's not easy it's good to have that reminder, like we were saying, but I think a lot of times, midst of it, that seems so far off, so far away, you know, sort of like, oh yeah, you know, one day it's going to be taken care of. So then how do I handle like my desires now to get to where I want to be? And understanding that in the midst of that, your desire is at the core of it, you know, like, what are the things that I desire, and am I willing to lay that aside for the ultimate prize, which is what God has for me.
Yeah. That's good, man. That was very mature of you.
hey.
Mature these days.
No, honestly, man, when I first read, you know, NIV as you were reading through this, man, Seba, verse 9, believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position. I was like, what the heck does that even mean, bro? And so I've been, honestly, I've read it like about 8 times since, we've been having a conversation about this section. And it's like, what pride in what high position? Like, what are you talking about? And I realized like that it starts with like believers. And so what gives you your high position isn't necessarily like where you are on the, social or economic ladder. The high position comes from you believing that you are what God says you are, and that's powerful, because I imagine that, if he would have had more paper and more ink, he would have said,
a laptop.
Believers that are rich, and like talk about, rich people who are also believers. But he just makes this quick distinction of like, hey, it's not about, money and power and status. What really ultimately matters is the status that you receive from God, and how you value that status may depend on your perseverance. That's what shows like how much you value the status that God gives you, that no matter, what your belief system may have been, or where you find yourself today, that you're able to say, I accept the fact that God loves me. Right. And I accept the fact that Jesus died for me for my sins, or for me to be able to freely express myself, or whatever. The fact that we are able to just, send up a quick prayer, and be in the presence of God and tell him, anything is powerful, because like, if you think of today's terms and try to tell, this guy, what's his name? Putin, try to tell him something, right, that you disagree with him. And, you could compare that to other people in leadership, but, and you get just, put away right there on the spot. So the fact that this, ruler of, according to the Bible, is ruler of the universe, you're willing to tell him whatever's on your mind, is awesome. So I think that he kind of connects all the dots here, where he says, if you're a believer, if you trust, if you don't doubt that you are, what God says that you are, then
that's good.
The demonstration of that belief is your perseverance in a way.
That's good. Yeah. And I think James will even talk a little bit more about it in chapter 2, where he talks about kind of like a hypothetical, right? If there's a rich person coming in and a poor man's in there, you show favoritism to the rich man, so it's like, I think it's even going off of what Paul was talking about in Romans. Like, we are now, like you were saying, right? It doesn't matter where you are in the economic ladder, what positions you have or whatever. Now that you live in this new reality of the gospel, right? Of who you really are and of what's finally going to come, right? Eventually, obviously we're living in the reality of that God is in control, but it's not fully 100% here, because we're still waiting for the end of sin and evil and all. But I think it's like you're living now in light of that new reality, right? So there's a new way of living, even a new way of seeing yourself, right? You're no longer seeing yourself in terms of how others see you, like, oh, you're just a poor person. Like, it's like, no, I'm a child of God. I've already, I've achieved, I've already, in another sense, I'm going to receive the crown of life. Like, I'm receiving the ultimate thing. And I think that should motivate you. And at the same time, the inverse, for people that are rich, instead of priding themselves in what they have, it's like, no, you got to live in the life that Jesus lived, of humiliating yourself, or humbling yourself. And, putting others before yourself. Right. So, very, very interesting there. And then again, just remembering that, as verse 17 says, every good and perfect gift is from above, right? Coming from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. Even again, the imagery, right? Heavenly lights, shifting shadows. Like, he's like, there's no darkness, there is no confusion in God. It's very clear who he is, and every good and perfect thing comes from God. And it's interesting, right? Because he says, don't be deceived. It seems like people were trying to tell them that, hey, God's going to, I don't know, maybe confuse you. God's bringing these bad things upon you. But he's like, no, God doesn't bring that. He may allow it, because of all that's going on in the great controversy. But every good and perfect gift is from above and comes from God.
I feel like when they say, when he says, don't be deceived, right?
Yeah.
And then goes on to say about all these beautiful and wonderful things
Mhm.
that God gives. I think that he's coming from a place like, don't be deceived. Like, don't think like, oh, it was me. It was what I did.
That's
It was
true.
like how I connected. It's how my business grew. It was
Mhm.
this that allowed me to have
That's
all
good.
these
That's
gifts.
good.
It's like, well, don't be deceived.
Yeah.
It was God's grace, you know.
That's
In
good.
other
That's
words.
good. Yeah, because it kind of seems that's a good juxtaposition. It seems that what we try to do, you know, leads to temptation or just bad, right? And everything that God does is good, right? So it's that again that issue there. Whatever we try to do, it's going to lead to death. And he's like, yo, it's not about you, because what you do is not good. Huh?
Yeah. No, I was like, it never was.
It never was. Right. It never was. That's good. That's good. Oh man. All right. And so jumping into the last section here, chapters 19 to 27, read them real quick here in your hearing. My dear brothers and sisters. How many times has he said that? Is that twice in the beginning? And he's like preaching. Take note of this. Everyone should be quick. This is my verse right here. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. If I ever were to get a heathen thing on my body, that's what I would get. No, but be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. There we go with deception again. But do what it says. Anyone who listens to the world but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at himself at his face in a mirror, and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. So a lot to chew on here.
Yeah.
A lot. But I like that. I mean, starting off the bat, 19, right? Take note of this, right? Literally write this down. Put it on your, what does it say? Write it on your forehead and on your arm. There you go. Isn't that's kind of tattoos? Write it on your forehead and no. Everyone, and I think this is crucial, especially as we were talking earlier, right? The importance of communicating, and as Stephen was saying earlier, not just through Instagram Live and Facebook, and you're not going to get too far on Facebook chat comments and sections, but in sitting down and listening to the stories of others. How different would we be in if people that were commenting like, well, if you weren't resisting arrest, or if you weren't living in that set, and just listening, hey, this is my story as a Black man in the United States of America. And you're like, whoa, I never thought about it like that. I've never been treated that way. So if we were just be able to be quick to listen before we're, and then even in that sense, I think many times when we're trying to listen, we're just waiting to respond. So we're not really listening, right? We're like, okay. Whoa, we're just throwing in our little tidbits of our little nuggets of attacks that we've heard from our different news stations. Slow to speak, he says, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. And I think that's very prevalent now, that you think you have a lot of even religious people that think they're doing a thing in the name of God, religiously righteous. This is righteous anger. I'm trying to fight against these liberal agendas, or maybe these conservative agendas, right? But are we actually doing it out of a righteous anger and trying to bring justice, righteousness, and mercy to this world? Or are we just angry ourselves because it's messing our narrative of how the world should be like, right? So I think, that's very, very deep there. Listen.
There's so much power, and I think listening, and just the willingness to listen, like I think it's really like, I think has the I think it could shift, even just this, what we've seen this week, like the ability to listen, right? I think could really change conversations, could change the way we act or the way we do certain things, because we've listened, but then also not just listened to listen to then prescribe something. Oh, this is what you need to do. But listen to just say, okay, like, and then having the slowness in your communication after that, I think is definitely the second part. Cause I think, there's a lot of times all right, I'll listen, fine. But we're really just listening to, prove our own point or to do that. And it creates more anger, right? And it creates this sort of like, well, no one ever, I can't ever have a good conversation with anybody because, they don't want, and a lot of times it's usually because we ourselves aren't positioning ourselves to truly listen. And I guess too, I mean, I'm just thinking about, and maybe it's more of a question, like, how do we know when, it's righteous anger, or versus like the anger of man? Because it says the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So how do we? And I mean, this is something I'm wrestling with. Like, how do we then handle anger? Like, how do we know that it's from God, right? Because I think a lot of times we might just say, Jesus threw down tables, right? Or Jesus was angry, but is it this? And is what I'm feeling or what I'm dealing with the same, or how I'm approaching this situation which I'm angry about? I don't know if you guys.
Yeah. So, I mean, it says my version said human anger, right? And just basically is like what we consider to be anger isn't what God considers to be his righteous anger, right? And so, like when you look at that story with Jesus, how long was his anger? How long did it last? Yeah. He saw something that was just so outrageous that he went over there, he cleaned it out. He said a word of, I don't know, I guess, man, the only word that's coming up to my mind is retribution. It's not retribution. What is the word of rebuke? Thank you. Thank you. Right. And so he says a word of rebuke, and then he leaves, and we don't see that anger anymore. A lot of times we justify the life that we're living, and we're so bitter and angry about something. That's not righteous anger. I don't believe anywhere in Scripture that God stays angry for long periods of time. It's just like, boom, like there's something that was wrong. He fixes it and he moves on. But what's embedded in our Adventist culture and many times is we get angry, but since we drag our feet and we don't do anything, we stay angry. And that's not righteous anger. Yeah. That's just us trying to justify why we're angry or bitter all the time. And I think that when it comes to righteous anger, it's definitely something that comes about from a severe violation that you see either within our relationship to God or our relationship to our neighbor. Yeah. And when you get that anger and you do something about it, then it should subside, and I believe that that's what happens in Scripture. Now, with me saying that, I am not saying whatsoever that Black people don't have the right to be angry, because this has been like really strong and and they're just being persecuted in this
nonstop
country, just before the color of their skin, and it's been going on since this country was founded, since before that, and it's still going on today. 200 years after we're celebrating 4th of July, and so there is reason to still be angry. So I'm not saying I just want to be completely that's not what I'm saying. But when it comes to us, and what I mean by us is me, people that look like me, that are white and don't have to suffer things every day. What the heck are you angry about? And if you're angry about how the situation of the brother to brother relationship that is in this country, which is pitiful, then do something about it. Don't just speak angry words and not do anything, because you'll stay angry, you'll stay bitter, and that's not the righteous anger of God.
That's good. It seems too like I love what you're saying too, but even like as we're looking at myself, right, and why I get mad as I'm not represented in the Black community. And so, yeah, obviously there's total justification to be upset and angry for so many years of as you were saying, Brian. But that human, you know, the difference between human and righteous anger is like, even when Jesus goes into the temple, like he's not just mad. I mean, obviously he's mad because they don't get it. They're selling and doing all these crazy things but I think it's because of just how they've been treating and mistreating people around, right? And so I think that might be the difference. One of the differences between human and righteous, where human anger, many times it's because of, you know, as James is saying, hey, you're going to face tribulation. So not that, you know, it's like, don't get mad when you're going through hard times, but it's like being angry because other people are being mistreated and hurt, I think is a way of how God's heart feels, right? You know, in the way that he interacts with the people of Israel when they're in Egypt, and different things that are happening, you know, as he comes in and says, hey, no, this is not okay. You can't be mistreating people. You can't be abusing people. You can't be cheating people out. And he's just so upset. And I think that shows that, as we've been going through Romans too, like the focus shifts from just you and getting yours and mine, and now to like helping and speaking up for others and saying like, I just, you know, I can't sit still because I'm so upset, not because I'm necessarily I'm not maybe being affected by it. And it's easy for me to just say, oh, okay, let them figure it out. But it's more because I can't sit still and just allow this to happen. And not say something. And I feel like that's what a part of that righteous anger is, just being angry because other people are being mistreated and hurt. And again, you know, 21 kind of says that, you know, getting rid of all moral filth and evil that is prevalent, and humbly accepting the word planted in you, right? So there's this active force of it too, right? Of just getting rid of whatever moral filth there may be in your context, any evil that he's saying. It's so prevalent in this world. Like, we have to be active in doing to make our world and our context, our community, a better place with that, right? So yeah, I think it's focusing on the wrongs being done to others.
Yeah, man. But what really just like floored me was, you know, these last couple of verses, man. You know, if you claim to be religious but don't control your tongue, you are fooling yourself, and your religion is worthless. Pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you. And I think that, you know, I think orphans and widows has a much broader definition today. You know, there are so many people that are orphaned, not because of the lack of parents, but because they've been ostracized by our communities, our faith communities, our society. And the pure religion, you know, that James is talking about here is viewing that person as someone that is loved by God and saying like, hey man, you deserve a place to belong, and you deserve a place where you can express yourself. And when I see that, bro, that's not us, man. You know, that's not our church, and it's so sad. And I think that a big you know, part of what our young people right now are being called to do is creating these spaces of freedom and just being able to live life together, you know, go through life together, and being able to listen to one another. And it's something that is so vastly different from what I mean, the church has grown up to kind of do, just to shove information down, you know, your throat. That it's hard for us to change and move in that direction of, you know, having small groups, having these spaces where you're really listened to and valued and loved. And yeah, man, we just need to work on our acceptance, and we can't accept or listen if we're constantly talking and preaching. So man, those are really two really powerful verses there at the end.
I appreciate that so much, man, because I feel like for so long I understood religion and Adventism and Christianity as, you know, how much do I know? How much can I say? You know, how good do I pray? How excellent do I preach? And, you know, sort of like gauging it that way, right? Oh, you're a pastor, so you're a good speaker, right? So that is what you do. But I think understanding that Christianity and faith is built on so many different things, and just the verbiage you were touching on it, Brian, you know, pure and undefiled. And I think there's so many things in the church that we associate with defilement, right? That would be found in, you know, orphans and widows and these sort of ostracized groups or disenfranchised groups, because as a church, we think it's our job to not defile the church.
Yeah.
Right.
God is saying you need to associate with that, because that's actually your religion, pure and undefiled, you know. And I think it's amazing. I think there's so much time spent on talking, so much time spent on making sure that we are saying the right things, or saying something that's accurate, as opposed to doing and showing, and, you know, being there, you know, in the midst, in the trenches, telling people how to handle their lives that are dealing with stuff. And like Brian was saying too, I think that's the reckoning maybe that our church has to have, you know, especially with the younger people, you know, because I think there's this desire for something more. And I think it's something that I felt, you know, like, man, there's got to be more to my faith, right? There's got to be more to my religion than just reading and talking about it and just consuming, right? There's got to be something more that we're called to do, that we're being pushed into. And then when I read that religion is pure and undefiled, we are visiting orphans and widows and keeping ourselves unstained from the world. And I think too, you know, the unstained from the world, you know, we can talk about, you know, the whole, not, you know, what is it? Not in the world.
No Yu-Gi-Oh cards.
In the world, not of it. You know, that whole sort of,
yeah.
But I think we misunderstand that too. I think we think like, if I do anything that remotely associates ourselves with something that's not church related, or not a certain look that is associated with the church, then we are staining ourselves with the world. We are defiling ourselves. But like I was saying earlier, man, defilement is clearly not defined in those terms. Defilement is really determined by inaction and just running your mouth.
Wow.
And
That's good.
Talking and not doing anything, not, you know, actually engaging in the work and visiting with people that are disenfranchised, that are hurting. That is actually defilement.
That's
and
good.
That makes perfect sense, Stephen, because, you know, when you look at that story of Jesus visiting the temple and just going, you know,
going ham.
That's what they were doing. They were doing all the correct rituals in the temple and all the sacrifices.
The right things, right?
They're defiling God and worship and the people by just burdening them with these insane charges for them to be able to worship God. And many aspects, you look at our church structure today and you say that in a little bit, you know, in some ways, you know, to be nice, in some ways we are expecting people to you know, check off a number of boxes before they can worship God, right? Before they can, you know, lead out in voice to God. No, you have to check these boxes. If not, you're not going to be able to. And for some people, I mean, it'd be so much harder to check off those boxes than for others. And so we're creating this unfair, I guess, we're asking for things that are outrageous from people just to be able to worship the God that we worship, and that is ridiculous, and that is defilement, as you're saying, Stephen. And so, yeah, man, that's good.
That's good.
It's just crazy how the church community is like. There's this thought process that is so like anti-biblical, anti what James is saying. Like the church doesn't associate in places like this. Like that's the thing, right? Like, oh, I wouldn't expect these people to be in church, or I wouldn't expect these people to attend church or to be Christian, right? Because there's X, Y, and Z going on. But I mean, Jesus literally, you know, reframed all of that then, and I would say
that's crazy.
That now, you know, in terms of how are you defining what your church is, like what makes your church great, you know, like because we have great music, or you know, we have a great pastor that speaks well. But what about, this element of your pure and undefiled religion? I think it's just that it's a complete, it's been inverted.
Yeah, it's a flip. Yeah, it's a paradigm shift.
It should be, and
that's good.
And it's really a paradigm shift back to what it should be.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm thinking about like how the Jews looked at defilement too, and obviously like they had this temple and the sanctuary, and they couldn't go and worship or give a present any offering or sacrifice if they were defiled, right? If they had obviously we have all Leviticus talking about what defiles you. One of them was being where Gentiles are, right? And in the same, going into their home, shaking their hands, maybe using the same cup. And so and I think we've continued that same idea of defilement to, I can't go to where these people are, I can't join the Black Lives Matter because that's gonna defile me. They're Marxists.
What about my witness as a Christian?
Right. Or I can't go to the homeless because I don't know, they got something, or I can't.
Corona.
And so that defilement, I think we've continued that a Jewish understanding of defilement, where it's like about a place, location, or thing. Whereas Jesus comes in and says, with the Spirit, you should be unafraid to go anywhere because it's not about what you touch. I'm saying? What is it? Another part that says it's not what comes into the mouth through the mouth that defiles you, but it's what's come out. So he's like changing it. He's like, it's not about others. It's really about you and your heart, because defilement really begins with how you're processing. And I never thought that's good, man. Like, you are actually defiled, not in being with lost people, as we've always talked about, and being in the world, but you're actually defiled when you're not doing for others, right? And that's a crazy paradigm shift, because so many times we're in our little silos, or like I think about that little tower from Shrek, right, where you have to go all the way to the top, and Adventists are all the way at the top, and we're looking down, and I can't go out there. I'm gonna stay in my little castle until Jesus, our Prince, comes and rescues me, right? And Jesus, like, yo, you guys are missing out. Like, you're supposed to be out there working and being out there, because by being in this closed place, by not going out and reaching out, you are actually acting in a defiled way rather than being out there with what you think is defiled, man. So I think, man, that's beautiful. Pure and undefiled or faultless religion is that, looking for the least of these, right? Being the voice, as Brian was saying, right? In our context, obviously here, orphans is still pretty big, right? We have, orphanages and all that is still it's a huge situation that we have here. A lot of kids without homes and families. But obviously we could throw in a lot of other things now current in our context, and at the same time keeping oneself from being polluted by the world, which goes with that, right? Keeping that understanding that the people out there are defiled, man. And then going into just how Christians view others, right? And as I've been reading this book on Christian nationalism and how we talk about other people, right? We look at immigrants as others, and they're unclean, right? They're not Christian. We think of maybe Muslims in the same way. We think of other, whoever's other is defiled, so we can't mess with them. We can't connect with them because they're not what we believe is the true.
That was the issue with Jesus, man. They always were like, this dude is jacking up our religion. He's jacking up the look, because for them it was
right. It's all about look.
This pristine image that they were supposed to have.
Dude, that's it.
It was always like, oh, he's with these people that are defiled, right? He's hanging out
eating with sinners, and it's like
sinners, and we literally do the same thing, man. Like, it's like we'll preach on that sermon, and then all of a sudden, like, when somehow we have a way of talking about how what we're doing today is different, like we have some way of rationalizing it, but
right.
It's quite simple. And then even James is just like, yo, like, you a hearer or a doer, and I love that analogy of just looking in the mirror and be like, man, it's cool, don't worry about it, and just move on.
I love that you say that, bro, because we stick to that verse in Isaiah that pretty much says that the Messiah Jesus would be ugly, right? And he maybe wasn't pleasing to look at, but everything that he did was aesthetically.
That's it.
Everything that he did was aesthetically pleasing. And so many times, like, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter how good your church looks, but what you're doing, is it aesthetically pleasing? I think that's what it comes down to is, are we something that people are attracted to, and it's more than just the building, especially now that the building is closed. Well, I mean, except for
just
you know,
our
Steve,
virtual programming experience. Yeah.
some churches are closed, right? And you know, are you still out there? Are you still doing? And that's what it comes down to. That question we all need to ask ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's just a great passage right there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah, I like that. All right. So the big takeaway for you guys from James chapter 1.
Just the last 2 verses, man.
Those two,
man. Like
it really just calls out to you, and I mean me, and just seeing like, man, it's like, hey, to the 12 tribes, it's like, do you remember where you were when God called you out? Do you remember
who you are? Yeah.
What he said that he wanted to make you? Here's your second chance, you know, to be that. And I think like God is giving me a second chance to be this, to create something that allows for other people to feel like heard and safe and valued and just like an integral part of God's family. And it's going to look so different from what church looked like before this pandemic.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my big takeaway is, man, it's so much less like, you know, I guess my faith and my walk with Christ is not defined by what I tend to think it is, you know. And I think as growing up Adventist and then being a pastor now, you know, I always define it by what I say, right? Or what product am I putting out, you know? Like, I think it's always that, whether it's, you know, in my relationship, you know, with my wife, whether it's in the church, like what am I saying the right thing? But I think, like, you know, the gospel and the, you know, the ministry of Christ calls me to, hey, like, where am I and what spaces am I in? You know, am I actually, you know, engaging in what pure religion looks like? And I think for me, it's a reframing in how I gauge that. And I think it's a continual reminder. Like, it's not the first time I've read this text, but it's hitting me like it's new, you know. It's just this reminder that man, religion is not pure and undefiled. Religion is stepping outside of what you're comfortable with, man. And on behalf of somebody else, because we serve a God that did that for us.
That's it.
And, you know, that's straight up, you know, the way James is straightforward, man. And so
he's not.
That's my takeaway, man. And I love how James writes, because he just he's just straight up. So
he said, so same way with me. I guess my thing would just be 19, right? Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. Someone mentioned one time, you have 2 ears and 1 tongue for a reason, right? While behind teeth. So, you know, it should give you a reason to think that you have, you know, twice as much. You should be listening twice as much as you are speaking. And even when you do speak, being mindful of how you speak.
That counts for media too. That counts as speaking.
Yeah.
Because, you know, so I'm not really speaking if I'm just, you know.
I didn't say anything. It was just, But that 26, right? Like Brian was saying, right? Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongue deceive themselves, right? So, you know, keyboard warriors.
Your tongue is also could potentially be your fingers.
Your fingers, And then it says that powerful line: their religion is worth less. It means nothing. So James comes in. He's going hard, just like Paul, not holding back any punches. Obviously, this is, man, a word for our day too. And as we'll continue, James is very practical in what needs to be done, what true religion looks like. And so I think it's gonna be a good conversation that we can continue to have. So thanks, guys. Appreciate you coming on. And those that tuned in or will tune in later, appreciate y'all too. Hope that you're encouraged. As James says, you know, whatever tribulation or trials you're facing, that you may you know, reach out to God to give you whatever it is that you're needing, right? Strength or wisdom, and that you may be able to face it with joy at the same time, being more of a doer than a listener and just a hearer or a sayer, but doing more and doing actually something for our situation in our world. So appreciate you all. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you all next week. Peace.